Good evening. Welcome, everyone. We're very excited to have you all here tonight. This is part of our what we call the Lighthouse Conversations, which is a series of conversations we've had since we've opened our doors almost years ago now, believe it or not, in January of 2017. Essentially, conversations with members of the creative community in Dubai. We felt at the time that very similar to Cinema Akil, which we'll talk about in a minute, there was a void that we wanted to fill in Dubai in terms of the conversations that have been had, the type of members of the community that have been talked about. So tonight we have with us Butheina Kazim, who's a personal friend, a friend of the Lighthouse, and the founder of Cinema Akil. To those that don't know Cinema Akil or haven't been yet, which would be shocking, it's been around now for, well, as a physical space for more than a month, but we'll talk more about that. Cinema Akil is the first independent cinema house in the Gulf, cinematic platform, showcasing all sorts of movies, from art house to commentary, you name it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that on the program. So I'm going to jump right in. Butheina, welcome.
Thank you, Asha.
Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure being here. From a house of darkness to the lighthouse.
I like that. Thank you. Let's start just a little bit about you. So tell us a bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? Did you always like cinema, or were you like a chemistry major and then did a pivot? You know, give us a bit of a sense of who you are.
What I always like to say is I like to let the films that we showcase tell the stories of our lives. So my personal story sometimes hides in the shadows, and I like to keep it that way. But since you asked,
just a little bit. Give us some nuggets.
I'm a Dubai kid. I mean, through and through. I grew up near the Iranian hospital in Satwa, the neighborhood, which is now, pleasantly fetishized. And it was a great place to walk around, to be part of, to witness. I've always had sort of a curiosity about being in other places and times, and I think that's the thing that drew me to the world of film. It wasn't as abnormal a kind of trajectory or a pivot into the world of cinema, because I always found myself at the intersection of culture, art, and media. I worked I started off as a graphic designer in Montreal, so that was sort of a natural.
Is that where you studied?
Well, my undergrad was in Toronto, and then I moved to Montreal for many reasons. Those of you who visited would probably know, including the burgeoning design scene at the time, and the lovely weather. I spent a bit of time doing that, and then decided I wanted to do a little bit more, and felt like there was a void in terms of the space that film takes up in Dubai, and this was in 2008, where dreams were permitted to come true. It was the golden era, and there was a lot of things that were being greenlit, including a project that I took on called Scene TV. I joined an organization called Arab Media Group, which was home to MTV and Nickelodeon Arabia, and they greenlit a project called Scene TV, which was a sort of a hybrid between the IFC, the Independent Film Channel, ZDF, the German Arts Channel, Arte, and a few others, and the Sundance Channel. And I was responsible for, among a few things, the programming and acquisitions of independent titles and documentaries. So that's sort of where I started. Definitely started to sculpt sort of my understanding of the film rights world, the markets. I went to my first MIPCOM, Marché de Film, American film market, etc., and built a lot of contacts there. Came back with bags of screeners, lost some of them along the way, watched a lot of films, and then 2008 came to an end, and the project never saw the light of day.
Was that because of what happened in 2008 and the recession?
Yes, it was definitely related to the sort of economic crisis, and a lot of projects got either consolidated. The television arm of Arab Media Group got sort of lumped in with Dubai Media Incorporated. I ended up staying in television, but there was something about the possession and the access to all of these important films from around the world that really needed to have a space, and I didn't think that the pan-Arab television space was enough to do that. So I sort of shifted from a top-down approach to getting these films seen to a very grassroots approach, which is where I'm at now. And I thank the stars and God and the people and the circumstances for that pivot and that shift, because I think that's the way to go. And the Lighthouse is sort of a testament to how that effectiveness takes root.
Thank you. Well, okay, let's talk about that for a second, because not the Lighthouse, but this move.
We'll continue to talk about the Lighthouse.
Thank you. You've had many pop-ups. You've had this nomadic existence for a number of years now. So I think your first pop-up was Third Line Gallery, early 2014.
Yeah.
And you've had literally hundreds of pop-ups since. Sharjah, Abu Dhabi, D3, various places in Dubai. And then you've moved from that and you've started making a name for yourself, both as Cinema Akil and the kind of movies you're showing, the quality of the movies, the curation, the programming. And then there was a shift to a physical location, which happened last month when you opened Cinema Akil in Sirkar. So was that always the case that you went in and said, well, let me test the market, maybe it's a year, and then that year became 3 or 4 in terms of pop-ups? Or was your interest all along of saying, I want to be nomadic, I don't want to have roots, I like different projects, and so people that like that, they don't want to be doing the same thing? And it was always designed to be a pop-up, but then when it became very well known and successful, you've decided to take roots. Walk us a bit through that process from nomad to resident rooted.
Tenant,
exactly.
With the paperwork and
that's right, exactly. We'll get to the paperwork in a second.
I mean, it had a lot to do with our trajectory. I mean, I'm an urban child. I like my brick and mortar. I always aspired for there to be a home for cinema in Dubai and the UAE at large. There was the unfortunate demise of the Dubai Film Festival, which we were speaking about earlier today in Abu Dhabi. The Abu Dhabi Film Festival, the Emirates Film Competition, Gulf Film Festival. All of these had precarious sort of states of existence and unfortunate ends or at least to be determined status. And I thought that was an important learning to take on board if we were to create something that's sustainable and something that is continuous in the city. And the objective was always to have a space, to always end
from
up
the
with
beginning. So you knew you wanted to have a physical space.
We wanted to have a space from day one. So our first pop-up as a testing ground for the program for Cinema under the name Cinema Akil happened at the Third Line Gallery in its old space. So it's actually right across the street from our current location. And it's right now a belly dancing school.
I remember that space very well.
Which is also a very commendable endeavor.
Ironically, sorry to interrupt you, Hani will attest to this. We actually tried to take that space after Third Line and start the Lighthouse there. So that was one of the spaces.
You had some tough competition.
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah, I wanted to take, but anyway, that's a separate story.
D3 has its,
You're right.
its arms open.
Absolutely.
I mean, for us, it was to operate under the name Cinema Akil was a continuity of the work that I was doing personally. So I started to after the film channel project ended, I started to take a lot of permissions from the distributors and from the rights holders to showcase these films in other spaces under my personal capacity.
Okay.
So I started working at places like, if anybody remembers the Shelter in Al Quoz, we did some screenings there, and then we had a partnership with the Abu Dhabi Film Festival to showcase some of their best that was happening in Abu Dhabi to the audiences in Dubai. So we did ADFF at the Pavilion, which was in downtown. So we did a lot of these screenings, and it was just under my personal kind of curiosity.
And just for those of us that are not as versed in the kind of the world of cinema and how the distribution rights work, you just called them up and said, "Hi, I'm Butheina, and I have this pop-up, and I'd like to." I mean, how?
No.
How? Yeah, okay.
No.
How does it work?
Face-to-face is irreplaceable in the world of film distribution and rights management. So that's why a lot of the work that I did, the groundwork for the television channel, poured into the current work that I do and building understanding of who the sales agents were, who the rights holders were. And building those relationships.
It's a whole process.
It's a whole process. I mean, they have to know who you are. What is an art house cinema in Dubai? I mean, hello, my name is Butheina at the Cannes Film Festival amongst 40,000 people that come through the Nashid the film. You kind of have to continuously cultivate that relationship, and that's why I make a point of going to the festivals and going to the markets.
So there's a parallel process of doing these pop-ups while you're building your network, essentially, because you didn't come you didn't have that network, right? You were building it as you went
I
along.
had a base for the network from the TV work that I was doing. So there was that groundwork. A lot of the companies folded and got acquired, and the sort of independent distribution or art house distribution world is also has a very high turnover and churn rate, especially considering the technological interventions that are happening now. A lot of these companies are changing shape. So there's a lot of maintenance that happens in building those relationships and knowing who the film rights owners are, and keeping up with the platforms that that actually showcase those films. So there's a lot of that happens in parallel as part of the. And one decision we made very early on is that we're not going to show films out of our personal collection, and that's kind of a lot of the independent showcase space was. I wanted to. I was I'm interested in film. Here's my personal DVD collection that I bought at Virgin Megastore. I'm going to show you the series, and it's great. And I think that laid the foundation for an interest level, but it's not sustainable. And in terms of the longevity of being a theatrical platform, it wasn't workable. So coming back to the physicality, the necessity of the physicality. We have an obsession here. We were talking about it earlier. With the idea of having a physical asset-based home. And I think that created a kind of an urgency to work towards that. Sabkal Avenue was growing. They extended their spaces to another 40 warehouses that were purpose-built. It made a lot of sense for us to be around like-minded organizations and people, and that kind of footfall. And that was always the goal. So we built a mini cinema in one of the warehouses to announce, the sort of the upcoming art house space in March 2015. And due to a lot of that, paperwork, zoning problems, funding, design, a lot of these growing pains, it took us that long to open the space finally.
And you still wanted to, so you spoke a little bit about this. You knew there were disruptive technologies, there's video on demand, there's streaming, there are all the things coming. And you still wanted to have physical space. Now, one of the things we thought about here when we started the Lighthouse was that we felt that people wanted an experience. It wasn't just about a place where you come shop or eat or even have a conversation. People really are looking for holistic experiences. I've been reading now, and I don't know if this is true, that in the States now, some of the movie houses, the ones that have created that experience in a more bespoke way, are coming back, and people are actually really seeking that. Of course, there are people that are watching Netflix and watching films at home. So you were aware of all of this, and you still decided to pursue that physical space. Was it that when you started, and I read about how difficult it was, you had a number of architects, a number of contractors, et cetera, until you landed where you are now on your feet. But was it at some point, let me just continue because I have to, or did you say, no, I can create an experience that is so profound that despite the disruption in terms of technology, people will want to come. They will not go and watch this on YouTube or at home on their, on their screens.
Look, it wasn't there was a combination of a kind of a stubborn, desire to end up with a space and a home that honored these films. But I think a bigger part of it was the continuous affirmation through different, experiences and communities and interactions with the larger sort of conscious sphere, of that existed in a city like Dubai. That there was a need for, a gap or a deficit of imperfection, the celebration of imperfection, the celebration of the communal experience, congregation, belonging to something, belonging to a space, putting your shoulders down. And I think that was something that was very important for a space like cinema to honor. So it wasn't really just, we were offered multiple times throughout our pop-ups to
go to
take
vaults,
over, to take over a multiplex. Yeah. They're like, here's a screen,
go to a mall.
We're opening up, we would give it to you to program entirely as an art house space. And Dubai Film Festival tried it, the 365, festival. That was unfortunately a failure, because I have this firm belief that art house cinema, conscious cinema, is not just about the experience of projection. There is that, and showing the film in the best way possible and showing it as the director intended, but then there is the communal experience, this romantic notion of shared darkness, of coming out of it and rubbing shoulders with people who've been through that same experience as you have. You entered into a world together, you traveled together through the moving image, and I think that's irreplaceable. As a physicality, as a communal as a collective, experience or poetic notion.
So now you have the space, and we're telling stories. So again, and I see a lot of, and obviously we are big admirers of what you do, but I also see similarities between what we try to do here, what you're doing, and part of our gifting concept, for example, was about telling stories. Essentially, believe people buy gifts not just to buy gifts because there's a story behind it, and people like that.
Yeah.
Of course, cinema is all about telling stories. So when you started now, and I'm sure the program was in the making for some time, I have to put it mildly, an understatement, and I will ask you how long you went to start the idea of creating a program. What stories did you want to tell? What was it underlying themes, and then you chose the program, let's say for the first couple of months, or was it, I want a diversified program, I'm going to take 2 from animation and 2 from art house and 2 from documentary? Walk us through your process.
Look, I mean, the curatorial process is a flawed and subjective one by definition. It is something that it combines your experiences, access, mobility, financial,
everything.
Facilitation.
It's a point of view.
Curiosities, everything. It's a point of view. So there is that reality that confines everything to do with the way that the program ends up. But the thing that defines Cinema Akil is that there is an element of an alternative voice. It is an alternative cinema to the mainstream. We are in the country that has the biggest number of screens, multiplex screens per capita in the Middle East.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it's a huge market.
Yeah.
We're competing with a lot on Bollywood, Hollywood, Malayalam cinema, commercial Egyptian film. So that is already saturated. So for us, our definition is that we are the independent, the alternative, the underdog, if you like, of unrepresented or misrepresented or proto-represented films. So we do a lot of repertory cinema. We do a lot of film education through Showcase. We do a lot of geographies that that we feel are part of our reality and part of the experience that we belong to in a city as diverse as as problematized as Dubai, and try to showcase those films and those perspectives. We try to skew towards a non-Euro-Americentric view of the world, but we also show the best of what's out there, and critically acclaimed cinema. So right now, we're showcasing Paweł Pawlikowski's Cold War. The director who made Ida, which was the Academy Award-winning, film from 2009, I believe. And this is his latest film, which was at the Cannes Film Festival in competition. Yomiddin was our opening film, and that film, you came to see it. A few people here came. Who saw Yomiddin? Great, so welcome. I'm used to seeing you behind the box office, so it's nice to see you here. Yomiddin was the sort of defining film that captures what Cinema Akil was about. First-time filmmaker, goes straight to the competition, and handles the stories of the sort of the underdog, the wretched of the earth, and that's kind of what we are curious about and what we believe in, and hopefully we'll be joined.
Was it important to you to open with an Arab film, or was that just happened to be as such because you believed in the story?
Both. I think we are. At the end of the day, we're in Dubai. Dubai. I don't think of it as an Arab city per se. I think of it as a multi-identity city, and I love that about it. But there is an element of us belonging to this particular geography. Being in such close proximity to Egypt and the current sort of socio-political space in Egypt that is underrepresented through the commercial cinema, and we felt like a film like Yomiddin kind of burst that bubble completely, and we like that about it, about its spirit. We belong to the network of Arab art house cinemas, or Arab art house screens, NAS, which is a network of similar cinemas across the region. So we're not the only ones in the region, we're the only ones in the Gulf right now, which is a lonely place to be. But we belong to this network, which includes a cinema in Tangier, a cinema in Cairo, 2 cinemas in Cairo actually, Khartoum, Algeria, Tunis, so a few cinemas across the region, and and that sort of Yomiddin was an homage to our membership and our larger sort of voice that we're trying to be part of and trying to project. So, and the other thing that was important though is that we opened with Yom Ad-Din and McQueen,
Yes, it's going to get
which were contrasting films, in many ways. But that's the statement in itself, because we're saying that Arab film or film from the larger region is to be treated in the same presentation, capacity and due celebration as any other cinema. It's not necessarily relegated to the space of geo-specific presentation.
Well, it's funny. I read it, and I was thinking about that contrast with Yom Ad-Din and McQueen as the opening films, and I was lucky enough to see both when they opened, and one a bit of as a macro struggle and one as a micro struggle. And it felt a bit that one was a very personal story, but a story of a struggle and genius as well, and another one obviously symbolizing so many struggles taking place, each of them dichotomies and all sorts of things at a macro level, but still human, still personified by certain individuals and a journey with great cinematography and all of that. So, were you very conscious of that contrast, or sort of showing those two sides, or was it sort of in two silos? I mean, were you trying to build a dialogue?
I mean, I don't really believe in the existence of silos when it's coming from a single source. There's always some overlap that happens in the back end, and I think that's what you end up with. McQueen was, on a very pragmatic level, on a very tactical level, meant to speak to a wider audience of, the design aficionados, people who've celebrated his life, but also people who are curious about the process of genius. How do you get to a status like somebody, like Lee Alexander McQueen? How do you become that? And what are the internal trials and tribulations that you have to undergo to end up with his notoriety? And what do you sacrifice?
And it's amazing because even if you're not into fashion, or I think you relate to the story. So I was speaking to Tariq, one of our friends here the other day, and he was saying that he's seen it I think 4 times, and he's an architect, and I'm obviously, and I think the story is so powerful that I found myself starting to Google and finding things about McQueen, because I knew him as a celebrated fashion designer, and I knew sort of he was a little bit cuckoo, but that's about all I knew. I didn't know. And you kind of, you really start going deeper. So I guess that's another fascinating element of introducing probably the audience to aspects of people they don't know. Do you feel that's part of the mission? There's this sort of cultural guidance, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's it's a personal curiosity through the voices that are involved in the selection of film, but there is something about dispelling the sort of the widely reproduced notions of great people and great men, and and specifically great men, that need to be deconstructed in some way and understood deeper, because there is, at the end of the day, when you watch the film, unfortunately, we only ran it for a week, and now I'm kicking myself. Our partners, Michaela and Sam here from the distributors behind the film, we didn't really expect it to hit home as much as it did. And the reason that it did is not just because it's Alexander McQueen and because it got covered in Vogue and Harper's, it was because it was a human story. It was a story that many people kind of, deal with. It's a story of mental illness and struggle and,
genius,
and
right.
Genius and the torture of genius. And I think that's the shared kind of thread that comes across through a lot of our films is what when you look deeper and when you look beyond the facade and beyond the posters and the billboards, what do you see? And what can you see, as a reflection of yourself? And I think that's the thing that unites great cinema, is being able to see a bit of your own experience and your own soul in those stories that you're watching and being part of, or surrendering to in the context of the cinema.
Now that you've opened, is it what you expected it to be? Walk us a bit through the rush when you actually opened. How did you feel? I mean, I'm very curious. And was it what you expected?
I don't know.
Or was it just like
I'm going to throw it back at you in a second, because to me, it felt very familiar.
I was just picking up we were picking up the plates and running to the kitchen because we were understaffed. But anyway.
And it felt like you were doing this every day.
Yes, yes.
That's the thing about it, is that when you're planning something for so long and you see it for so long and you're sketching it, there is a certain familiarity, and I think that's hopefully by design, by the choices that we've made through, the multiple labors of love, across the space, that comes through. And there is a sense that, you can walk in and you can easily feel like you've always been there. And that's the one thing that, I feel right now, going back to the space and being there all the time, is that this belongs here. This feels natural.
Absolutely. And was Circal always a natural choice for you?
Absolutely.
Natural.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there was no other place like it. With all of its sort of evolutions and sort of shifting focus. At the end of the day, there's nothing that exists like Circal, where it's an independent, essentially family-run endeavor or dedication, of an asset to the world of creative expression. Whether you agree with the mix of concept, whether you agree with the way that it's exclusionist, whether there are certain things that need to be
Reconfigured.
Yeah, reconfigured, maneuvered a little bit. At the end of the day, you're still getting people. We're right next door to the flip side. The only record store that stands right now, and I don't even know. Like it's a certain kind of psychosis that is involved in many of those those spaces. The Junction, which spent a lot of time producing a community theater in school halls and school auditoriums, and they've been doing that for year in, year out for 10 years, and finally opened a space at Circal, and you see the benefits of that. And for us, that particular lane also made a lot of sense, because we ended up with the communities that weren't only going to highbrow, sort of events and gallery spaces, which is important, but we wanted to be a little bit more diverse in our mix, and we ended up with that. And I think it's a question of how do we keep it going. How do we rectify these challenges of exclusion? And that's the biggest problem, I think, from going from nomadic to
Physical space.
physical and ticketed. Because our essence was public presentation of cinema. Now we are ticketed for the boring reasons of keeping our lights on and our staff paid. Because that becomes part of what you think about. And I think that cuts out some of the access.
Well, but you have a mission to be sustainable, and therefore that's the only way to do it, really.
Yeah.
Because if not, you will cease to exist quickly enough.
Exactly, and I mean that's.
Well, I think when your audience have seen that, I think they appreciate. They actually want to. They want to pay because they want to support.
Yeah.
I mean.
But I mean, it also means that we'll continue to try to find ways of continuing our public presentation.
Yeah.
In parallel or in conjunction with the ticketed films, because the ticketed films are their own beast anyway. They require this economic kind of model to continue to work and to be presented, and that's part of the health of supporting the industry. Like if I only relegated a film like Yom Ad-Din to public presentation where people always have free access to it, then I'm not contributing to the life cycle of the film. I'm not saying to the distributors, hey, this film makes money, people want to see it, give them more money to make more films like this, and that's what we wanted to be a part of, and that was a big part of the drive to open a space.
And the point that we discussed a bit earlier, which is of this catch me if you can concept of, it's a pop-up,
Yeah.
oh, I missed it last week, so it's gone,
Yeah.
So with the physical space.
Now we're here. Like
and you
we're
get
here,
a couple of,
Yeah.
you may show them a couple of times at least. So I'm just shifting gears here. I know for a fact that we have a lot of people in the audience who are guests who have their own businesses or thinking about starting their own businesses. So I want to kind of go a little bit behind the scenes here. How do you operate? So it's you, and then there's a team. Do you do everything? You choose the movies, you do the operations, you take the tickets. How do you go about choosing your team? Because one of the things that we faced certainly as we grew is finding the right talent, making sure people are motivated and want to grow with you, but also are capable of facing the challenges that come with startup, essentially. So how do you go about building a team, and how does your team look like?
I mean, brutal honesty was one of the predefined elements of getting people to come on board. I started the cinema on my own, and it was just the two of us for a good 3 years, and a network of freelancers and a network of partners that helped us
Because
continue.
if I look at your website, it looks like something that's been in existence for 10 years and is, it looks very together.
We put up a good front, and also sometimes 2 women is all you need to run
We definitely agree with that.
But now we've grown. I mean, having a space where you're operating from morning till evening. We have 2 part-timers that work with us. We're still a team of we're 4 plus a full-time projectionist that that puts the films on. we're all also trained as projectionists now, so if
Anyone
anything goes
can do it,
wrong, we gotta jump in. And that was the other thing, is all hands on deck. I mean, there was nothing that we wouldn't do. You know, you would
Are they all film fanatics? Are they all, or just good at what they do?
No, they're all kind of crazy.
Okay.
So.
Well, I think
There's all like this kind of adventurous spirit, this restlessness, this curiosity about the world that brought us together. And I mean, that's always going to be the thing that I look for, is, you know, people who don't have a lot of preset notions of what you're meant to be doing, people who are not married to a specific job description, and people who are curious about presenting something different beyond a job, you know, and that's the thing that it needed, and it wouldn't have existed otherwise. The other thing that we had that helped us was, you know, a big network of, you know, of curious volunteers, partners, supporters that always poured in, and that's how we keep our operations going. On an average day, you walk into the cinema, there's 4 people that are on a volunteer basis coming in and out of the space. So that's another big part of it.
And how do you do a brainstorming? So if you want to run a certain idea, if you're thinking, should I run Medine for 1 week? First of all, should I run Medine? Then should I run Noor McQueen for 1 week or 2 weeks? Do you just sort of go outside of yourself and then make a decision, or do you have someone to? Because that's one of the things we face here as well, is, you know, you need this brainstorming. It's essential to making decisions. Yeah. And yet every day we have to make decisions on the fly because there's such a big operational element. But so how do you go about that?
I mean, on the programming side, we've only been running for a month and a half. Sure. So it was myself and a friend of the cinema for a very long time who ran a similar space in Amman, Jordan, the Rainbow Cinema. And he worked with us very closely on putting together the program. And we kind of bounce ideas off of each other, because one thing I didn't want us to end up in a sort of a very homogenous or a very singular view.
He's the gentleman that sits at the door with his laptop.
There's many people like that. So he was the gentleman that presented the film.
Yes.
And the one who's presenting The Evil Dead on Wednesday for our Halloween special. So if anybody's interested in a different kind of frightful experience, come dressed up to Cinema Akil. I mean, so he brought a bit more of a culty, campy, sort of experimental, view. I tended to skew towards the sort of the melodramatic or torture-ridden, dramas. So there was always this like dance that we'd have to go through. Through our pop-ups, we always worked with a network of curators and different, sort of.
So who was behind Grace Jones? Because that's always an interesting choice.
Oh, absolutely me. Come on, I mean, there's no doubt about that. Grace Jones. I mean, she's. If you haven't witnessed her in all her glory, this is the film to see, because she. Again, it's the stripping down to humanity.
Yeah.
And we have fantastic, distribution partners as well that work and believe in what we do. So Front Row Films, represented here by Michaela and Samad, they've been a very good sort of support system for, bringing to us and believing the story of a cinema, of a standalone cinema of 133 seats in Al Quoz, and allowing us to experiment with these films and present them. And we've delivered. I mean, we've been able to.
Well, you get free drinks at the Lighthouse, so anytime.
They'll take you up. I'll take you up with them. So I mean, there's that. I mean, there's trying to reach out to as many diverse voices as possible to present the film.
And what was interesting, I mean, just for a second about this particular movie is, obviously people think of Grace Jones in a certain way, and the movie showcases something very different. I mean, a kind of very personal, human side of her return to Jamaica, her family, which is not how most of us think. Studio 54, Grace Jones, house music, fabulous. I mean, you kind of, that she shows up without makeup in many parts of the movie, with a husky voice. I mean, I don't know, was that a conscious decision to show that side of her? Versus, for example, I don't know, I'm sure there exists a documentary on Grace Jones and essentially just...
that's the interesting part about this film, right? Is that she decided that this is the time to tell my story. Okay. And she chose Sophie Fiennes to be the voice, behind it. And she was the director that she actively chose. Because throughout her life, everybody wanted to tell a story about Grace Jones, and she was approached, numerous times, to have a documentary made about her life, and she rejected them. So when she met Sophie Fiennes and they became friends, at some point she decided on this trip to Jamaica. When you see the film, it will make a lot more sense. And she calls her up and says, "Hey, you want to come to Jamaica with me and start making this film?" And that's how, that friendship and you can see, and that's where the graciousness of Grace Jones, comes through when she's speaking to people in the background, and she is in French and translates immediately to Sophie, who's behind the camera, and you really start to see a very different view of this woman, of this feminist, of this voice of a generation and multiple generations.
Yeah, when she yells at the Frenchman to replace the
Yeah.
women with men, that's a great highlight.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was watching a different documentary the other day about Quincy Jones, and it starts off, and his daughter is one of the two people that made the movie, and it starts with him in the hospital in kind of basically that's. So I'm just wondering whether you think a lot of those sort of very well-known names, obviously Quincy Jones is a legend, but it's his daughter, so he greenlighted this movie the way it is, whether they deliberately want to show a certain fragility to their audience, because they can make a movie that's just about their best of, the highlights. And you see that very much with Grace Jones, where she speaks about being physically abused and all of that comes in the movie. Do you think does that draw you when you're thinking about documentaries to kind of tell a story that maybe people don't expect, as opposed to kind of a best of?
I mean, I don't know, I'm not a documentary filmmaker, but I do think I'm drawn to documentaries a lot because I believe in a way in which the truth of documentary or certain chosen truth of documentary allows people to access weakness. And through that weakness, you access, a reality. And through that reality, you access the possibility for yourself and understanding your world through that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you start to see how someone like Alexander McQueen, like Grace Jones, like Quincy Jones, even our opening film last year, where we ran a stress test version of the cinema right now. I Am Not Your Negro by Raoul Peck, and it's all told through the narration of help me out. What's the writer's name? Oh, thank you, James Baldwin. That's what happens when you program 100 films. So James Baldwin, and you see that you see the people and the stories and the trials and the tribulations and the day-to-day factors and experiences that lead to this, genius outcome. And I think we're tired of that. We're tired of this sort of endless celebration of, great men who've made it, how I built this, the Elon Musks and those voices. And not to take away from them, but there are these myths that we create, these gods that we give power to, that, are still human and still come from certain realities. And it's through those realities that you reveal the universal of their accessibility in a way.
Before I open up to the audience, just one last question. What's to come? We talked a little bit about you wanting to make this again holistic experience, experiential. It's not just about seeing a movie or a good film and coming in and out. So I know you have some plans in the pipeline. You want to walk us a bit through that in terms of the next couple of months?
I mean, definitely the next, until at least the end of 2018, we'll be focused on purely the presentation of excellent cinema. I think that's a gap that's already been that's already been kind of waiting, and and the continuous presentation of a good slate. We've just put out our November program, which includes Hirokazu Koreeda's Shoplifters, which won is a Japanese film that won the Palme d'Or. We have Black Girl and Warde by Ousmane Sembene, which is a 1969 beautiful film from Senegal. We have a short Korean film festival, a collaboration with the Korea Arab Society.
We have an Algerian movie as well.
We have an beautiful Algerian film that everybody needs to see called Until the Birds Return. It was at in the Director's Fortnight section, I believe, in Cannes a couple of years ago. We have an Iranian horror film, so a genre from this part of the world called Fish and Cat by Shahram Mukri. And My Pure Land is the opening film for November. It's a Pakistani film about these women that defend their house, when the man of the house falls ill. So there's a whole kind of slate that's coming up. But I think a big part of our next chapter will be more of this. More engagement through conversation, more panels, more presentations, more bringing people into the world of film. And telling their own kind of experience.
And the space really lends itself to that as well.
I mean, we have a bunch of couches, that people,
exactly.
can use for
Exactly.
whatever. And the other thing that we did that I really want to mention is that we opened up the cinema beyond the intimidation of a cinema space. So we consciously chose to leave the windows intact, and during the day it's used as a big giant living room. It has really strong Wi-Fi. It has a bookshelf that a lot of people have contributed to. You can come and read from there, work from there. Have really good Indian street food from Project Chaiwala, our F&B operator. And have a cup of chai and work throughout the day. So we wanted to break that kind of the barrier. It's still there. I mean, people still walk to the border of the cinema, the forbidden invisible border of the cinema, and don't walk in. But we're slowly trying to break that taboo.
Well, to that, in the spirit of gifting, and we wanted to gift you something that is an addition to your bookshop, library.
Thank you.
At Cinema Akil. So,
Thank you so much.
We thought we'd just start slowly but surely help you build up your library, because as you can see, we're big book fans as well. I'm going to open it up. So, please, any questions? Don't be shy.
It's fascinating to hear about your passion for doing this. What do you think is the contribution to the growth of Dubai that this cinema brings? And in 10 years' time, when you look back, what are you hoping this would have done for Dubai?
I mean, just the idea that people can see a bit of themselves or their own histories or their own cinemas on the screen and share that with other people. In a city like Dubai, where people often feel isolated, we always like to talk about we're such a diverse city, and you're constantly interacting and dealing with and experiencing other cultures, which is true to a certain degree, but sometimes the engagement tends to exist on a surface level. And film allows you to break beyond that. When you're entering into somebody's, living room or someone's deathbed, by proxy through film, that allows for a certain kind of sharing that you can't otherwise have on a day-to-day level. So, and a good example of that was a film we recently showed. It was our first Repertory Wednesday special. It's a film called Sayat Nova, or The Color of Pomegranates, which was made in 1968 by Sergei Karajanov, an Armenian filmmaker. And it's a very specific, non-linear, poetic, thing of beauty, but it's experimental cinema. I mean, it's not your McQueen. So I thought, at best we're gonna get 30 people in here. I'll be very happy they experience this thing, and and then we're done. But much to our surprise, we had a house, full of people who had some connection to Sayat Nova, the poet, to Armenia. Their neighbor was Armenian. They wanted to show something about Armenia to, their friends and their colleagues, and that was the room. That's what it comprised of. Cold War right now, Paweł Pawlikowski's film. It's a film from Poland. We have the entire Polish community, congregating, in waves through the cinema. And I think that's the contribution, is a place where people can really, truly overlap into each other's lives through some sliver of a story.
Yes, please. Colleague.
Thank you so much. I think this is wonderful what you've done. I want to ask, and you partially answered, but I want to ask this: is the audience changed by what you're seeing? And for example, how does it split by age group? Are there young people coming to watch these movies, or is it mostly nostalgic people that want to get that experience back?
It's a good question. It is absolutely film dependent for the most part. You do have your kind of loyal set of cinephiles, that come to pretty much anything because they trust in a certain editorial voice, and that's great to see. We have one of them with us here tonight, and a few others, and and that's really wonderful, and that's the community that we really rely on to continue presenting the films that we do. But oftentimes it is ethnocentric. It is it is political. It is time-based, era-based. It is it's interest level, that drives people to come to the cinema. So, when we do programs, for example, at Seoul DXB, that's a very specific audience that's interested in a subset.
You had a whole hip hop special there, right?
Yeah, I mean that's all we do, and that's what we get is street culture focused. We do a lot of historical kind of trajectory framing films, but nonetheless, like those are the people that we get, and they probably will not come to a film like Cold War, So it is it shifts definitely through age groups, through time, through era, but then with the hope and the dream is to grow that beyond specificity of geographies and borders and languages, and just open it up to great cinema.
I think you've done a great job of bringing it out the strict boundaries of national identity. That's one of the things that I'm kind of blown away by. But to look behind what you're doing, I'm kind of curious. Every time I go there, the audience is completely surprising in its mix and in its enormous numbers. And thank you for doing this. I'm clearly not the only person in Dubai. I'm grateful for Cinema Akil. But how do you market it? Or do you think it's the power of film?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, we've been around for 4 years, right? So that helps. Like the idea that we didn't necessarily have a physical space that we were confined to, and we went to people rather than expect them to come to us, helped a lot. We were at Seoul DXP, we were a market outside the box. There wasn't an event that we wouldn't do, because
It is, that's what I wanted to.
I'm flattered, but no. I mean, really, it's the team behind the sort of the tone of the cinema, and being and presenting, like insisting on, independent presentation in spaces where they're not supposed to exist, Like Market Outside the Box is not exactly a place you expect to see a film about Iris Apfel, but we did that, and we tried to continue to do that, and thanks to that, proliferation or, sort of insistence of audiences on cinema, we've been able to attract a lot of them to the space. But I tell you, it's a struggle still. I mean, even with our reputation and the coverage that we've been getting and a lot of attention, getting those numbers in that makes a cinema sustainable at the end of the day is very difficult. It's very challenging. It's still a niche market. So that's going to be our real challenge over the next few months, is sustaining that beyond the opening, beyond the hype. How do we keep it going and how do we keep it stable?
But you'd be surprised, because I think you also open a market of people that may like cinema but have not been going to cinema, ourselves probably included. So I think you are sustaining a certain crowd, but you're also bringing in new people that maybe have typically not been cinema goers in Dubai because of a more commercial nature of most of the the whole experience possibly. So I think there's there's this first jump when you start, but then I think for sure you will get to a sustainable point, and then you'll see another jump. And I have no doubt.
I believe in the audience. I wouldn't have done this if I didn't think that the numbers were there.
Yeah.
We did the test, of Cinema Akil as it stands today. We did a very rough and ready iteration of it, so we didn't have any, walls. We had curtains where walls were. We had, a temporary projector tower where, our current projector tower is. We had donations of, of furniture that was our uncomfortable seating. And we had all of these things in order to see if people were coming in every day. And they did, the numbers were there. For a film like Loving Vincent, which was our closing film from last year, we had 900 people lined up at the end of August, to get into the film. So I think people are there, and the love of cinema exists. Now, for us, it's a challenge of how do we keep it going and how do we continue to speak to it.
So just piggybacking off of Nina's comment, I was actually there for Yoga Deep. And I remember sort of having this moment where I was like trying to sniffle quietly. Because you're really so
You weren't so
overwhelmed by
quiet.
emotion. I wasn't that quiet. I try.
We're working on our acoustics right now.
Yeah, and then kind of like, like a little bit embarrassed and looking over and realizing everybody's like either like, kind of like trying to kind of, and leaving that space and feeling like there's something that kind of connects you to the people around you because you've all lived something. I hear that 100%. And I guess I'm curious to know from you whether, in a way, some of what you're doing is also a little bit in conversation with, Amar Abbad has this new exhibition at NYU Bolivia on the history of cinema in the UAE. And different kinds of spaces that existed kind of free, like, oh, it's just going to be Hollywood, or it's just going to be Bollywood. Can you tell us a little bit about not only ruptures with the past, but also continuities with the past?
Yeah, I mean, we're actually in direct sort of correlation or conversation with Ammar's work and preservationists at large, because we felt like there was an obligation of keeping parts of what cinema represented in the in its early days here, which was like late 60s, early 70s, and then throughout the 80s of the cinema that I was privy to between here and Bahrain, and a lot of it was standalone cinemas. A lot of it was chai and samosas. A lot of it was people going in families and groups and hanging out outside on the foyer. So there are these experiential elements that have dissipated with the emergence of the multiplex and that conveyor belt type of phenomenon of experiencing cinema. It's all about pushing the popcorn and pushing the sort of the people in and out of the seats, and that's has its space. I go to my Avengers every once in a while, and I'll buy the caramel popcorn, and everybody needs that kind of escapism. But there's more to cinema. I mean, on a really bad day. So there's room for more. Going back to the direct correlation, one of Ammar's photos in the exhibition right now shows a part of the balcony in the Golden Cinema or the Plaza Cinema, which was in Bur Dubai and demolished only last year. We kept those seats. We went into the demo site and brokered a deal with the demolition company, which was going to sell it for a scrap, to give us whatever they could from the balcony. And we took those seats, held onto them for 3 years, collected dust, and then reupholstered them and cleaned them to the best of our abilities. And they're the cinema seats right now that you see in the cinema, in Cinema Akil. So there is that part of the spatial element that we wanted to preserve, but there's also the memory that that they represent of a standalone. It was a 1,000-seater gargantuan cinema in a pedestrian-heavy environment in Dubai. Of a, I think, more egalitarian nature and accessible nature to film going that I think we've lost through the invisible borders of the shopping mall setup, and hopefully we will have some role to play in breaking those intimidations that exist around cinema going right now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really enjoyed this. For those of you sitting around, we will have a nice music performance by Megan and accompanied by acoustic guitar, so stick around if you have time. And thank you once again, wishing you the best of luck.
Thank you, Hashim.
And we'll see you many, many more times here and at Cinema Akil.
Looking forward. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you.